So I'm going to look at a couple of examples. This one you may or may not have read, Letter from Birmingham Jail, but again, you shouldn't have had to in order to follow. Martin Luther King knew how to skillfully appeal to his audience in Letter from Birmingham Jail. For example, he writes, "In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion?" Okay, cool. That's like a super nice sounding quote, right? But all things aside, like if this was all you were given, there's a whole lot left that you would have to Google Letter from Birmingham Jail to figure out a lot of things here. The claim is that he knows how to skillfully appeal to his audience, but we don't know who his audience is. That he kind of left that out of the context. And then we have this quote that's supposed to show how he skillfully appeals to his audience, but there's no telling. Like they did not tell or explain how. Like there's no connecting of the dots. It's just sort of like, here's the claim, drop in quote, and move on. And there's nothing we can really do with this. So the two main things jumping out here are that we don't know who the audience is and there's no explanation. So who is his audience? Like how do we know that this is appropriate for that audience? How does this, illustrate that he skillfully appeals to his audience? There's a lot of things kind of left out. And this is how it should sound. We have the same opening sentence, and then in addition, he understood that his audience, so we're here, he understood that his audience, a clergyman whose life's purpose was to serve God, would understand and relate to religious references. So we know why he's making a religious reference, because he's speaking to clergymen. So that makes a lot more sense. For example, at one point, King uses a particular religious reference to counter the clergyman's claim that the actions of King and his followers, while nonviolent, must be denounced because they eventually incite violence in others. Notice the quote got a lot smaller. They just quoted exactly what they needed to make the point, so the question that they're really wanting to talk about, and everything else they turned into kind of paraphrasing it to help create some context and to make it a little bit easier to follow. And then the last point, King's audience will likely understand and relate to this analogy, rendering King's argument more credible to his readers. So they have the claim here, they have enough context and a selective enough quote and enough explanation that even if you hadn't read Letter from Birmingham Jail, you could follow what was happening here. I'm going to do the same thing here with one more example. Susan Bordeaux writes about women and dieting. Fiji is just one example. Until television was introduced in 1995, the islands had no reported cases of eating disorders. In 1998, in 1998, 3 years after programs from the United States and Britain began broadcasting there, 62% of girls surveyed reported dieting. Okay, so there's a lot of things wrong here. There's a lot of things missing. It actually just says she writes about women and dieting. Bam. Drop in quote. That's basically a dangling quote. There's nothing here to really, there's not even a claim for this to support. We don't know who Susan Bordeaux is. What is her expertise? Why are we even listening to this person? She writes about women and dieting. What does she write about women and dieting? What is her opinion? What is her stake? Like what point is she actually trying to prove? Why are we talking about Fiji in the first place? It doesn't actually say, like, I mean, aside from it being a vacation spot, I don't know why we're talking about this right now. It doesn't seem to have any specific relevance. And again, I mean, it just sort of drops off at the end. I mean, there's nothing here that shows they're actually using this quote for anything. They're not talking about or explaining anything. It's just a drop and run kind of situation here. So here's what it should sound. Or what it should sound like. The feminist philosopher, Susan Bordeaux, so now we know she's a philosopher, deplores the hold that the Western obsession with dieting has on women. So we know what her opinion is. Her basic argument is that increasing numbers of women across the globe are being led to see themselves as fat and in need of a diet. So we know kind of her general opinion, what the point is, we know what her stake is. Citing the island of Fiji as case in point, Bordeaux notes that, and then gives the information. Bordeaux's point. So this is how the explanation begins. Again, you can kind of see that kind of indicator or signal. Bordeaux's point is that the West's obsession with dieting is spreading even to remote places across the globe. Now we know why Fiji, right? Remote places across the globe. It's a Western obsession, and it's spreading to even remote places. Duh, now it makes sense, right? Ultimately, Bordeaux complains the culture of dieting will find you regardless of where you live. Dun dun dun. So again, there's context here. We know what the authors, we know who she is a little bit, what her opinion is, what her point is. We know why we're talking about and pulling from this piece of information. We have explanation for what we're supposed to take away from it. This is how it's done.